Right. Thank you very much for attending our Reimagining co-design session today. My name is Michael Arnold-Magis. I'm filling in for Paolo Girelli, who's on leave. We also have with us Estefania Siliota Chehari, who's the Associate Director of the Center for Design. This set of conversations is hosted by the Center for Design. And if you don't know about us already, we're both a place, a platform, and a hub. We're a place where faculty and students can come together to do collaborative research. We're a platform to foster interdisciplinary design-based collaborations, as well as a hub to connect with external and internal actors across industry and academia. We have a wide variety of practices represented through the Center for Design. Here's just a short list. We host a number of different events at the Center for Design. So you can see right there, VR, AR demos of new technology, the MFA thesis presentations, and presentations by different invited guests. We also host a conversation series of which this is a part. We've been hosting these for the past 3 years, and so there's quite a extensive library of them on our YouTube webpage. The current conversations for 2023, and you can see that this will be the final one of the year, and maybe the best. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll turn it over to Pierre and friends.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Our panelists, our co-moderator. My name is Pierre-Valery. I'm an assistant professor here at Northeastern University in the music and art and design departments. And I was really excited when I was asked, and I'm currently a fellow in the Center for Design for the year 2023, supporting in relation to my research, which is focused on culturally grounded learning environments and pedagogies, specifically on embodied learning and cultural practices, in particular drumming, from early childhood on. And I was really excited about this opportunity to lead the conversation as it relates to design, because I'll speak more about this, but I thought this would be a great opportunity to engage a variety of stakeholders within the educational landscape, right? Of which academia is a part, but also in which the community plays a very important role, and explore the possibilities, and also think about the various perspectives that these different stakeholders may hold with relation to this topic of co-designing, right? What is co-design? In the context of education, I think about design a lot in my work because some of the issues that we're attempting to address in early childhood specifically, but through K-12 and up to higher ed, has very much to do with these questions around design, right? And we know that as far as early childhood goes, Black children only represent 18% of the kindergarten population, but about 43% of out of school expulsions, which is an indication that of not only the racial bias built into some of our designs, and some of the differential outcomes that might lead to. And so with thinking about co-design, we are asking the question about what is the role of the community in designing and in contributing to the environment and to the pedagogies and to the curriculum that children get to experience from preschool on, right? And how do we ensure that that curriculum and those experiences are grounded in their cultural forms of knowledge, right? And I know this is some of a jargony term, so I wanted to make sure that we start the conversation today by asking, and opening up to this question around funds of knowledge, right? And I'm just curious if this is the question that anybody on the panel or in the audience can answer. What do ancestral or cultural funds of knowledge mean to you? Right, and I thought it was very important for us to start this conversation today because that's going to be a foundation for what I think all of our panelists that we've invited to participate in this conversation are going to be speaking on from one perspective or another. So to anybody, would anybody like to take a try at a definition of cultural funds of knowledge? If this holds for anybody online, just as a way to get us the conversation started.
I can go. So when I think about cultural funds of knowledge, it's something that, you know, it's a tacit form of knowledge. You don't know how you acquired it. You just know some things by just knowing, right? And a very personal example for me that I can use is just growing up in a household where my grandma knew how to sew, my mom knew how to sew, and I didn't go to fashion school or anything, but just by seeing that it's something that is being done in Africa, we are very much into, like, you know, creating your own clothes and stuff like that. So it's just something that once I tried to do it, I could figure out how to do it, but I didn't usually learn. So it's like there is so many things that we just understand that it's just within us, and yeah, like we can always tap into it when the circumstances arises. So I would think that, you know, it's like this tacit form of knowledge and it's just embedded in you as a person, by virtue of the environment that you grow up in or what you're exposed to, that you can tap into to, like, you know, relate with other people who are seeing.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Jane, anybody else from the audience?
I think for me, I didn't grow up dancing, but I heard that my grandmother on my father's side was a major artist, from dancing to singing. But when my father saw me have huge interest into dance, they were very petrified. He goes, in Haiti, like, dance is for girls, they associate it only with female. And the struggle of knowing that you inherited something very powerful and not able to express it when you were a child, that can be also traumatized. So for me, I felt like I needed to learn how to dance, because when I saw Black Body moving, I was like, I want to do this. The first woman I saw moving their body on the screen was Lavinia Williams, who worked from America, and I was living in Haiti. And for me to see her moving, it was my grandmother moving. And I said, I want to do it. And my father came and turned on the TV. And every time I turned the TV back on, it's like, why don't you go and eat? Because this is not for you. So for me to be able to finally, at the age of 12, 13, to be able to go without my parent consent, to go to a place and learn that craft was liberating to me. And after whatever came after, I accepted. I got disciplined, I got, you know, making fun of, but I felt like this cultural element of my country, I was very, very pleased to be able to learn about it.
Yeah, and I'm happy to share as well. So I actually, you know, one of my kind of research areas, interests that led to a kind of topic of research for me was funds of knowledge pedagogy, specifically within the context of K-12 schools. And when I looked at the funds of knowledge literature pertaining to, you know, pedagogical practices that happen in K-12, like urban settings in particular, the way that a lot of scholars talk about funds of knowledge is, you know, I think they often de-emphasize culture and speak specifically to the the learned practices that, you know, end up translating into actual skills. So it's less kind of, you know, something that is like a cultural practice that people engage in, and more of like, I know how to run a business because I have seen my parents doing it, or I've spent time in a restaurant. The first time that I started thinking about this concept of ancestral or tacit funds of knowledge, and I think that it's a little bit of a, you know, a change or a diversion from kind of what traditional funds of knowledge are, was when I was teaching in a middle school classroom in Boston. And I was teaching, I think, you know, social studies that year, and we were doing a topic on, a unit on Africa. And I was showing a documentary, and there was a drumming kind of ritual or, you know, an experience that was being projected. And you could, of course, hear the rhythms. And as I looked under the desk, and this was a classroom, this was a unique kind of school in Boston where it wasn't quite segregated. There was actually a good amount of students from different racial backgrounds. And as I looked under the desk, as the students were watching the video, I saw that in particular, like many of my Black students were tapping their feet to the beat under their desks, and not so much the other students who didn't have a racial or ethnic historical kind of connection to Africa. And so that kind of like sparked something for me that I've tucked away and not talked about in terms of, you know, my own research, but it's something that, you know, as we're having this conversation today, my mind is brought back to, and I'm really happy to like engage in this conversation today, because I think that this is really something that is probably less explored within the Funds of Knowledge scholarship, and is as important, if not more important.
Great. Thank you for that. I think this is a perfect time for us to really start the conversation and invite our panelists, including those who are online. So maybe we can take a couple of minutes to have everybody introduce themselves. I see Cliff, you've raised your hand, so please go ahead.
Okay, can I share on that first question and introduce myself?
Absolutely.
Welcome everyone. My name is Cliff Lee. I am in the Art and Design Department in CAMD and also in the Education Department at Mills College. I really love all the responses from everybody so far. I just want to add my view of it. I think first of all, the first things I thought of is just like throwing out that kind of positivist research mentality of objectivity. I think most of the folks in this room recognize that there's no such thing. And so when I think of the ancestral cultural funds of knowledge, I think is everything that I do. You know, it shapes the way that we make meaning of all forms of information we take in, whether it's visual, auditory, even smell, touch, taste. We have all these filters in how we make sense of our world and ourselves. And I feel like those filters are our ancestral and cultural backgrounds. And I really think I've been thinking a lot and really going deep into thinking about the non-Western approaches to learning, and specifically thinking about indigenous epistemologies where they recognizing learning is not simply of the mind, but knowledge is learned through 4 interconnected dimensions of our emotions, spirituality, cognition, obviously, and also the physical sense of learning. And so until we start recognizing all these other areas, how we learn, then we don't really get to the heart of what learning is. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for that, Cliff. Sebastian?
Yeah, I don't know how to follow Cliff on that one, but that was, yeah. So my name is Sebastian Ellington, Flying Eagle Ebarb. I'm a member of the staff there at Northeastern. I'm a teaching professor in the design department, and I've been here for a little under 2 years. Love it here. Thanks everybody for having me. So I think for me, the sense of like funds of knowledge is a little bit different in that I agree with everybody who's spoken here. I remember the first time that I picked up just doing beadwork. I had not watched any videos. I had not done anything. And I was just like, I want to try this. And I was surprisingly good at it all of a sudden. And I was like, how am I so good at this? And like people were like complimenting me on some of the beadwork I had done. And excuse me, as my cat joins me here. And so it was like, okay, well, how do I know how to do this? And then eventually I watched some like YouTube tutorials and things like that. And so as someone who grew up in New York City, like I was connected with my tribe. I'm talking to Apache out of Louisiana. And so I was connected with my tribe, but I was like, I didn't live there. And so I have connection through my family members, through my elders, but I'm not there with the larger group all the time. And so like part of this is me parsing out.
Oh,
Somebody keeps muting me. I'm not doing it. Yeah, so part of this is like my journey right now is parsing out how much of what I understand is ancestral knowledge versus learned knowledge versus and many of the other things that kind of Cliff talked about, and how much is innate in me and versus learned through current moments. And so it's been an interesting journey that I'm still kind of on.
Great. No, thank you all for that. And just to build on what everybody has said before we turn to our first question for our first panelist. But I just wanted to, this is great because it's sort of bringing up some of the things that I was hoping that we would touch on in this opening section in terms of what you just said, Cliff, about this notion of which I think the literature philosophers like Bourdieu have called the habitus, right? Cultural habitus, that we all inhabit a certain set of behaviors, habits, preferences that come from just by virtue of our lineage, right? And literally like our bloodline. And I think that that's an important aspect to emphasize in terms, especially when it comes to learning, because education, from its etymology, right? Education really needs to pull out, right? And so the idea that the cultural environments would not be reflective or tap into that habitus, right? Those forms of knowledge, to me, is counter the impetus and the purpose of education, right? That education should really look and begin from that place, which I think that to what Jalene mentioned, and I appreciate that distinction in terms of distinguishing just the traditional, conventional view of funds of knowledge, which is sort of more focused on these skills, and the particular skills that are not tied supposedly to any kind of cultural background. But the reality of the educational environments is that they may not be overtly so, but they are based on certain cultural assumptions, right? Which historically have been primarily Western conceptions of space, of rhythm of learning, modalities of learning, and all of that. Which brings me to the distinction that you mentioned, which I found interesting, was that in your case, you mentioned that at home, in your parents, this cultural piece was actually not encouraged. And so you bring up another tension that I think is important to speak about as we go through this. And so I just wanted to mention that and turn it over now to Jalene for our first question, which actually is directed to Jean.
All right. So Jean, and I know maybe just for the benefit of the audience, would you mind taking a moment to just kind of introduce who you are and what you do before I ask you the question?
My name is Jean Appolon. I'm a dancer and choreographer here in Boston, but I grew up in Haiti. But I had a passion to be a dancer since I was a baby. Not like, not when I turned 15, I wanted to dance. I wanted to dance since I was out of my mother's womb. So to me, I think being here and being able to share my skills with you is very humbling to me, but also to being able to really continue to go back and forth in my country to share with future kids who really have talent. Because I feel like each of us have major talent, but sometimes to have space to explore it can be difficult in Haiti, but I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you, Jean. And just for the sake of transparency, I've been dancing in Jean's community class for over 15 years now. So I wanted to ask you, Jean, this question. So for like anyone who's attended your Saturday classes in Cambridge, soon realizes that like this is a Haitian folklore class and this is a space where like you as the instructor and like designer of the course of the class are tapping into elements that are uniquely Haitian, right? So in terms of like culture, in terms you're touching on culture, like bringing up dance practices, musical lineages, and spirituality. But this is also a diverse space where people from different backgrounds and different walks of life have found their community, myself included, and a home. What are your thoughts on why people who, otherwise, like me in some respects, I am married to a Haitian, but I'm not Haitian by background personally. What are your thoughts on why people who don't otherwise have a connection to Haiti are so drawn to and committed to your Saturday classes? What do you see it is that people are connecting to, and why do they keep coming back? Is it something that you've intentionally kind of embedded into the design of the class, or is it something that you've discovered along the way about people, about how they connect to this particular art form, or something else?
Thank you for that question. That's a huge one. I think since I was a young kid, I was always connected to people, and I always drawn to people's energy, and I wanted to serve that in my class. Because I think growing up in Haiti, I think I grew up in a village where everybody knew your parents, everybody could discipline you, everybody could feed you. So to me, I wanted my participation here in this country. As soon as I arrived, I said to my mother, I need to go back to Haiti. And my mother was like, why? I'm like, I don't see people in the street, because as soon as you get into your home, your door is closed, so you cannot really in connection with anybody who's even living next to your door. So I wanted to really create a space where people could come and connect and be able to express themselves, even though it wasn't their culture. And for me, I feel why people are very drawn to the class, it's because, I don't know, there is an energy of community in it. Because I think each of us have something very special to offer. Even people who come to the class, who just come to sit down and watch, I feel like they have something to offer. Because human connection is something that's very powerful. And I think for me, growing up in Haiti, I understood that, yes, we have Haitian folklore, we have the drums, it was very exciting for people to be drawn to, but there is an element of safety, trust, healing, community, I'm gonna say it again, that I try to really create intentionally for the class. So people can not say that they didn't come and find something. In fact, going to church. Because I grew up in church also too, but I wanted people to find something even deeper than church. Something that they can feel like they are growing together, they are expressing together, and they are learning together. So for me, I think that was the way they schooled me in Haiti, and that's the way I went on to the class too.
I will just say that for myself, I feel as though your class has enabled me to tap into some ancestral or tacit funds of knowledge that maybe is connected to Africa, and reached Haiti and places in Africa, and here that my kind of family comes from. And so I definitely have had the experience of like realizing something within me that like wouldn't have been realized if I hadn't had the experience of dancing with you.
Thank you so much.
And I imagine that could be the same for others.
Yeah.
Participate.
Very much so.
Hey, before I move on to the next question, I just want to highlight a little something that you mentioned, Jean, in terms of, and I don't know if you think of them as values or principles, but you mentioned feeling, trust, safety, right? And do you see those values as being part of the practice?
It was part of the practice, because since I was, like I said to you, I grew up in a village, so the funds of culture that you are mentioning was always part of that safety net that we want to look over each other. we want to protect each other. We want to make sure that each other's kids are safe. So it's something that I found since I was pretty much growing up in my neighborhood in Haiti. So, and that's also why, despite of the violence that they keep on portraying Haiti as, yes, I was exposed to a lot of violence, but at the same time, neighborhoods where I am, people were always coming for your safety. People always coming as a parent to just make sure that you are fed, make sure that, you are, in a good place.
It's funny that you mentioned that because, some, like, through my funds of knowledge, like research and a study that I led a few years back, one of the identified funds of knowledge that pertained, explicitly and directly to Haitian immigrant students was the funds of knowledge around collectivism and collective culture. And so even if it's not something that's explicitly taught to, Haitian immigrant students or Haitian immigrant origin students, that could be a tacit fund of knowledge that, pertains to Haitian students and could, in some ways, if you're thinking about design for instructional spaces or other activities, could be one to tap into.
Right.
And I could just ask that, because like that's one saying that I grew up on, is that it takes a village to raise a child. And that's like what you say about that is like literally what I experienced. But I remember one time I was living with my grandmother. I was too young to go anywhere, and she was having a nap, but somehow I had this fantastic idea that I wanted to go somewhere, like maybe go see my cousins or something. And so I'm like, I begin my journey. I'm on the road, and then I think I'm about to cross, and some lady just grabs me by the hand, and I didn't know her, but she knew whose child I was and knew where to take me back to. And so she goes and knocks on our door, and my grandma is like, she was sleeping, so she wakes up, and first of all, like, what is my grandchild doing outside? Right? So it's this thing that, everybody's business is everybody's business, right? So you don't turn your eye away from what someone else is doing. So there's this sense of like, be responsible for each other. Whatever goes on in your life, like, I need to know. And so it's like, that is some aspect that needs to be brought into like the educational space when you're teaching that. Okay, yeah, fine, you're trying to learn certain things, but like there is this, cultural part of me that, yes, we can have competition, but then also look out for each other. So it's, how do you marry those cultural aspects with like when training children, like that?
Thank you for bringing that point home, because I think this is, without knowing it, that was sort of the point I was trying to get at, that these are some of the tensions that, back to my work in education, which are, and around culture, which is reflected, which is pointing to this fact that you have for lack of a better term, the schooling environments and the schooling culture, by and large, right, by virtue of its design and being oriented and centered around standardized tests and perfect attendance and all these metrics that are coming from a certain positivist place, right, of assessing phenomena and what's actually, growing or not, right, that is coming from a culture of competition, right? So it's a competitive culture, and when you have students who are coming from a cooperative culture, that can be a source of tension. And I know we've been talking a lot about African cultural practices, but I don't want to give the impression that this conversation is mainly about that. So because all cultures provide rich wells, right, from which inspiration can be drawn, guidance can be taken in terms of how to best help learners progress and evolve based on their own habitats, based on their cultural background, based on their funds of knowledge. So this next question is going to be for Sebastian. There's a Candy feature that we came across on the web that highlights your work, and in it you're quoted as saying, "Getting people to activate themselves is a matter of making it personal." And you also talk about how your own ancestral background is one that's informed by multiple cultural heritages. So here we live in a pluralistic society where people don't always neatly fit into one category. And where collaborative spaces are often quite diverse, right? Like the one that we have here today. So when you're thinking about the design process or approaching a design process in your work, how do you account for those pluralities and ensure that you're making it both personal and inclusive? You can speak to that question, please.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I could probably write a book on. But to kind of get it to a shorter, more succinct place, a lot of my work with my studio. So I have a studio called Nahi outside of Northeastern. I have a partner who's absolutely fabulous and brilliant. And we get a lot of Indigenous clients coming to us because they want an Indigenous designer. And so, a lot of people are like, oh, well, like one Indigenous person helping another. And the reality is, like, one of the first conversations that we have to have with, new folks that we haven't met before is, how can we help your community? How can we represent your community? It's very easy to kind of say Native American and lump hundreds and hundreds of different tribes in together. But the reality is, like, we are vastly different in a lot of different ways. And yes, there are certain similarities among some groups, but not necessarily all groups. And so there's a constant conversation of, I know who I am and I know where I come from, but that doesn't necessarily give me the right to then represent somebody who's Tlingit, somebody who's Coastal Salish, who's Cherokee, and you name another tribe. And so there's a constant conversation among Native American designers about what is cultural appropriation among Indigenous peoples. And like a huge part of what we have all kind of sat down, we're all in the same Facebook group, we've kind of sat down and talked about together, is that part of this is about representing the people who have hired us, and they're just trying to get to the closest place to their approximation of what represents them. And so how do we work within their communities and with them in order to find that place of representation? And so a lot of that is just bringing in community members, bringing in people who are heads of tribes where appropriate, bringing in knowledge keepers, not always the same folks, and knowing the difference is important sometimes. And then bringing in people from who are related to or connected to the people who are hiring us. It's a constant process of bringing in more people, checking with them, seeing where we're at. And sometimes you find that you got it wrong, and that's okay. But the whole point is that if you start the process with the understanding that we're going to get it wrong, and that's okay, and that we're working to get it to the right place, is really important, because there's nothing worse than representing somebody the wrong way. And that's our goal here, is to constantly, again, connect with the larger group of stakeholders. And then when we start bringing about multiple identities outside of just a single tribe, it happens quite frequently where we're working on something that's meant to represent, a broader Indigenous movement or group. And then how do we represent everybody at the same time? And the answer is abstraction is part of it, but also weaving in multiple stories and multiple motifs as a way to say, like, we are all here in this larger kind of mosaic, and that we don't necessarily need to be as one, but that we can coexist together and intermingle without necessarily being us swallowing each other up and being some sort of unified practice, when that's not always the case. Hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, no, thank you for that. It does more than answer. It raises new follow-up questions. And because what part of what you mentioned about your process, which I think was part of what we also wanted to talk about here in the context of, we are here today at Northeastern University, so on an academic campus, and we're talking about, and you talked about some of the process in your work, which involved very close and starting with, bringing in community members. And so in terms of those best practices, I think that a follow-up question sort of to that, is, and I know that you were talking about in the context of your design work with clients, right? But in the context of perhaps, like, just to frame it simply, since we're at a university, in the context of university community partnerships, what are your thoughts or opinions on, in terms of those best practices, right? And how to make this work happen within the context of academia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the reality is that there's no short answer, there's no quick answer, and that's the thing that I think, and that's not just true for academia, that's true everywhere, is that people want to do the thing and then move forward and say like, oh, we did the thing, and then we feel good about ourselves. But the reality is that in order to really do the work in the right way, it takes continuous, sustained community involvement. Hello, Kitty. Uh, continuous, sustained community involvement from a multitude of partners and constantly checking in with them. And like, one of the things that I really appreciate about Native folks that I have found in working with them is that they are not quick to give up their knowledge, especially of their selves and of their people. And like, you have to earn it. And the way that you earn it is showing up, not just when people need things and not just when you need something, but showing up and being a part of the community on a consistent basis, supporting the community on a consistent basis, and showing what you will do for the community before asking what the community can do for you. And I have found that in academia, on my short period here and in other places, and also at the city of Boston before this, that is how you have to maintain those relationships and continue those relationships as if people are your family, you are connected to them, or else things will fall apart, or you will be seen as somebody who's just kind of coming in and using resources and colonizing in a slightly different way, but under the same banner nonetheless.
Right. No, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning those elements to watch out for. And I think that that's one of the dangers, especially in terms of, academia is a lot about frameworks and models, and that, I really appreciate your emphasis on the fact that, back to what we were saying, talking earlier around belonging, right? That you can't there's no shortcuts to community building, right? It's a long and consistent and ongoing road that has been ongoing for a long time, and it's through that consistency. So I really appreciate that. And so thanks. Moving to you, Cliff. In your work with Bay Area youth, and in particular the project that was the subject of your recent book, Code for What, you present stories of young people from underserved communities who effectively tapped into their culture-informed funds of knowledge to create digital products for social impact. Some would say that this was a revolutionary act with some Freudian undertones, centering the voices of marginalized youth to create tools for examining lived conditions and forms of oppression with an eye towards social impact. What do you see as the role of culture and ancestral wisdom in the design and use of emergent technology? And what are the implications of all of this for the future?
I think before I answer that, just building on what everybody has said, I love everything. This panel is awesome, great group of folks. And particularly with like what Sebastian just said, I think of Adrienne Marie Brown's like quote about moving at the speed of trust. And that's how you build relationships, right? Like all the things that Sebastian just described is kind of how I feel like I think of the work that I do with research participants. I don't even call it research participants, but like the community that we create to collectively learn together. And I think that kind of performative, extractive, drive-by research that is pretty much like conditioned for us to do, because it's always like, oh, like you said, finish this project, move to the next one, finish this paper, do the next thing. But that's not how I think all of us on the panel and and the two of you work. We know that it's much more than that. And I think that's how we centered our work, is building that kind of like what Jean and Jane talked about, building a community, and the work that you do to cultivate and nurture that is really important. I think about that is what I've done in the classroom, first as a high school teacher, and then now in higher ed, and then in these research settings, the same thing is like, how do we create this collective culture and of interconnectedness, and seeing how we are whole people and not just like this well of knowledge that we're trying to extract or something like that. And that looks like really simple things sometimes, like breaking bread together, having ceremonial like openings, closings, just shared practices that we develop over time. And I think at the heart of it, it's really starting at the center of each one of us, our respective identities, our cultures, and then leading with that, and then not being shy and afraid to talk explicitly about some of the systemic and institutional challenges that we face as a result of being our identities, wherever we come from, and seeing the connections between each of us, despite our differences as well too. So I think it's a very different perspective than, I guess, Western typical canonical kind of research practices that we see in our workplace.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so to bring it back to the question around the design, and perhaps this is not an aspect that you wish to emphasize, but in your book, you do have a very nuanced and critical understanding of code and technology. All right. So as we're talking about this, and we're here in the Center for Design, right? And today in our society, design has very much technological connotations, and so and typically I think the assumption is that when we talk about ancestral or cultural things, that's not technological, right? And so with respect to your work, what do you see as the role of culture and ancestral wisdom in the design and use of emerging technologies, and what are the implications of this for the future?
Yeah, I think that we have like a misnomer with, like, when we think of technology. I mean, technology has been in all forms of every culture, in all different like groups and different times. And so when I think about it like that, this is just a new form, digital, forms of technology. And I think I look at like the way that we design the learning ecology that we try to employ is to think about remastering these tools for what we want it to do. Often it's just like we take off the shelf, whatever, Google Suite, things like that we just take and use. But with the young people that I've worked with, over the past, I guess, decade plus, is just thinking about like, okay, this is what it's designed and meant to do from these corporate entities or whatever it is, for entertainment, for profit generation, or whatever it is. But what is it that we see are some struggles and challenges in our community that we want to address? And can we utilize these tools? Or sometimes we have to remix and remaster these tools for our benefits. And then at the same time, I think a big part of like the work that I've done with YR Media over the last decade is publishing it and sharing what we've learned in that process. So like when we talk about what's behind the black box of like algorithms and like AI and machine learning, part of it, the first step we always do is just demystify what that is, because we, I think a lot of us have certain connotations, including our young people. When we first talked about AI, they think about like, sentient like robot beings, some sci-fi movie or something like that. But then we're like, oh, it's literally, in our phones when it has like autocomplete on your text messages, things like that, that makes it very real for them. Or even the, on Spotify, their streaming services, how they recommend songs, there's an algorithm behind it. And first to break that down, and then after they understand some aspects of it, starts challenging. And I think that's cultivated in the culture that we have in our space, is just like one of empowerment and agency, that despite what they're doing to us, it seems like oftentimes we have a way to speak back against it. And how can we do it? And sometimes it's with technologists supporting our young people and creating new tools to challenge that one-dimensional view of what they think these tools are for. So I think that's how we kind of attempt to do that.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And makes me think about what Sebastian was saying around the personal, right? And starting with the personal, and identity, and looking at community and the needs of the community as a starting point for approaching design, which I think has huge ramifications and implications for education, teaching and learning particularly, right? Which I think for me in my work personally, I have a strong resonance with that. But we don't have enough time for all of that, and but perhaps some of that will come through out in our next speaker's response, which I'll turn it over to Jalene to ask the question.
Okay, so Jane, so just I know that we actually didn't give ourselves a chance to allow you to introduce yourself. So before I ask you the question, can you just tell us a little bit about what your affiliation with Northeastern is and like who you are?
Oh, who I am.
And you're
We're not
entering
finished
space.
Okay, my name is Jane. I'm a master's student here, studying pursuing a master's in experience design. I'm currently rounding up my co-op, which have been working with Pierre in the last 5+ months on a project that is, we're basically trying to develop, and implement this culturally responsive curriculum for early childhood education. And one of the interesting things about the project is that we're leveraging this cultural practice, particularly drum language and rhythm, and embodiment. We're thinking, how can we bring that into, developing a curriculum for early childhood that, uses rhythm and embodiment to speak to them. So on the project, I work as a design strategist. It's basically just applying strategic design principles to think about, how do we design a curriculum? What are the learning environments it's happening? And who are the stakeholders? How do we engage them? Just to ensure that at the end of the day, we have a curriculum that is very responsive to the people, like the learners that we are designing that. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is my affiliation to Northeastern and this project.
Okay, well, I have a question for you that like specifically relates to your experience working as a design strategist on this project. So in your role, as you're co-designing culturally responsive curricula, learning environments, and pedagogical strategies for early childhood, can you expound a little bit on like what significance the community holds as a stakeholder in the process, and what does this entail in terms of engagement strategies? And I'll just preface this by saying, like, I'm personally invested in hearing your thoughts on this because of my work here at the university, which is I'm the Associate Director of Community Engaged Teaching and Research here. And so part of our work is facilitating connections between faculty and students, that are part of a course, and community partners so that service learning opportunities can happen. So I would love to hear just kind of like what your thoughts are.
No, it's a huge question from Pat, first of all. But to start by just emphasizing the importance of community, as myself and Jane and every other person has spoken about. Community does play a huge part, particularly coming from, because this particular project is grounded, is inspired by the African culture, right? So the elements that are being pulled from there, is pulling from the African culture. And there's this sense of like community, and there's a sense of like it takes a village to raise a child. So there is, we cannot deliver this project without actually involving the community. So they do play a key role in the sense that we can assume certain things, we have certain ideas, but in order for us to design a curriculum that is culturally responsive, we need to hear from people. And that even just ties back to just like the entire design process, where you always start to do so. It's like you need to know, what people and what people that you're designing for. You need to hear their point of view. So you're not just designing based on your idea of what should be, right? But it's like we need your input. Like we need everyone to come on board. And it's also particularly sensitive because of the age group that we're designing for. It's early childhood. It's children within the age of 3 to 6. They don't know how to read, or they're still learning how to read. So there is a lot of parental involvement. So we need to, how do we bring in the parents into this? Because at the end of the day, even if we have different learning environments where some of them are facilitated by us, a huge part happens at home. And it's the parents that are primarily responsible for running that. So there's this, first of all, this responsibility of transferring what we know to the parents to be able to facilitate that, right? And so there's it's a really delicate and very intensive thing that we have to like bring in the community, because besides the parent, there's also daycare teachers. There's just so many people that are involved, that are trying to like raise this little one. So community does play a huge part. We cannot do it because even if we design the curriculum that is fantastic, there's the implementation part, and it's bringing people on board, and they kind of like have to trust you. That element of trust as well. They kind of have to trust, first of all, open themselves up to you and tell you about themselves, for you to include that and just have this co-design that goes on where it's like, we have ideas, you have ideas, how do we come together to like do that? And so that then leads into, what are the strategies that we're using to engage parents? So while trying to, because we're working on a research project and we're figuring this out, we don't have this already figured out, but some of the strategies that we have in place is, having events like family literacy night, where we can host families and they come in like the little ones, and we teach them together. Like we teach them, they try out some rhythm activities, right? And so they get to experience and learn that with us, and so they're able to then take that back home. We can also, one of the strategies, like having workshops where we can go to daycare centers and, have workshops set up for like a period of time where we get to like teach children this different curriculum, and then also find a way to, bring parents on board such that they learn something at the daycare during the workshop, and then once they go back home, they're able to actually like reinforce that learning. Another strategy is, having like design clinics where we pick like different aspects of the project to, ideas on, and then we invite people to come into the space and, just, this is the problem, how do we go about it, right? So there's a couple of different strategies for engaging stakeholders. We're trying, and we'll see which one works. But again, design is a very iterative process, so we try something, it doesn't work, we try it again, right? And just have it going.
Have you encountered any challenges? Long deep sigh.
Good times for you. Okay. I'm not sure what's that.
And feel free to,
Yeah, okay, so specifically on this project, there are so many challenges, not just from the part of engagement, but I think one key friction is just simplifying this for someone to understand, right? So I would just to give some insights, into the project. We're trying to use, the concept of drum language and to learn things like words, learn like proverbs, learn sentences. So how do you go from just reading to then understanding what I just said through, right? And so there's a lot of work that has to be done in, first of all, breaking this down in a way that, just anyone can understand, and not just someone who has ancestral ties with drumming, but it's being, okay, how do I have this classic fundamentals that I can understand, drum language, but someone who doesn't, and I know it could be beneficial for them, how do I break it down and make it simple enough for them to understand, to be able to even teach someone else, right? So that's one of like the challenge of just breaking this down in a very simplified way, because if you're engaging people, there's just going to be a lot of confusion in your face, like, what are you saying, right? So that's one of like the key challenges that I know that I've come across in doing it. We haven't really gone deep into the part of engaging, and because we're still working on like the building of the curriculum and all of that, and then so it's first that we have something to approach the community with, and then start from there. So we haven't really gotten deep into that aspect where it's like, okay, the challenges of trust and that back and forth, but just the process of just building this out to take it to people is it's a little tough.
Anything that's meaningful is always the intense time to achieve it. So for me, I think when you talk about designing curriculum to help kids understand through music, that's what we try to do. Also, even to our young kids, we teach in different schools, because I teach for many different schools for babies around Boston. And even trying to make them understand movement can be very challenging. So for me, it's always patient, and also it's always determination, because if you have passion for something and you really want to turn it into something where everybody can benefit from, it will happen, but you just have to do it.
And design is an iterative process,
Yeah.
right? And so you're learning things along the way, and you're able to make adjustments to your
Yes.
design
Right,
strategy.
to be honest, like when we started this project, like where we started from and where we currently are, it's just. You cannot go into design thinking, you know, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Because you would quickly realize that. Right, and then like so many things keep unraveling. It's like one of the, I remember like when I joined, we had this setup of, okay, we're going to have a workshop, you know, at daycare, and we do it, you know, week by week where they're exploring. So first week they're probably exploring like vocabulary, and then learning proverb, and then learning numbers and, you know, stuff like that. But then we came up with this, we encountered this issue. So if we have like, so the plan was to have, so there's 30 learners at the daycare center. It's like take 10 at a time. And it's like, okay, so if we take 10, what happens to the other 20, right? While they're learning. So the other 20 will wait for 1 month for this first cohort to finish. And then the second cohort, like, how do you manage kids? And then to be like, oh no, you this group, stay this way, let's engage this group. There's gonna be some tension. And so in thinking about that, it's like, okay, you know what? Instead of us having that simultaneous, like, okay, this, then this, then this, what if we set up something that everyone can partake in? And so that led us into like breaking out and having this, you know, kind of like triadic framework where we have a station that is focused on digital literacy, we have a station that is focused on like embodiment, we have a station that is focused on just exploration and tactile learning, where, so if you have 30 students or 30 learners, you can always break them down. Okay, this time engage in this time engage in this time engage in this. And that way, you know, everyone is involved at the same time, and then they can like, so that's just one of the things that just by virtue of doing the project, we realize some of these hiccups, and then we think of how can we just correct this and like.
And to your point of like, you know, the design process is being something that's not linear, you know, like I feel like when I think, and this may not resonate with everyone, but I feel like when we're thinking of kind of like a linear, or when we're thinking of like Western kind of like orientations to kind of, you know, work and life in general, I think of it in terms of more being aligned to a linear process. You have a clear starting point and a clear objective, and you just kind of like charge ahead, right? Whereas in non-Western societies, and this may just be my own perspective as well, like it is kind of more cyclical, more iterative, more adaptable, you know? And so I think that if we're thinking of, you know, ways that cultural and ancestral funds of knowledge, particularly that are not Western derived, or like, you know, have this Western kind of framework, or an ideology, then having that kind of a, you know, an approach to doing this work that's like taps into your funds of knowledge, your cultural funds of knowledge that are not deriving from Western culture, like that may privilege you in some ways to being able to carry out the work.
Just allow yourself
to allow yourself to kind of go through a process and make revisions along the way.
Nice. Thank you all for this wonderful conversation. I feel like I could go you know, a couple more hours, but we only have 20 minutes left. And we have an audience both online and in the room, so want to make sure to open it up to any questions or reactions from what has been shared so far. Otherwise, we have plenty more questions.
Somebody online wanted to share something already. I think she said, I'm gonna have to go, but I wanted to talk about something. So you can look at the message online. Yeah.
They just said they wanted to thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
So any questions from anyone at this point?
Here or in the online audience?
And yes, the chat room is being, we're filling the chat room for questions. So to anybody who's joining online, feel free to ask the question. So until those come up, I just wanted to follow up on what Jane mentioned. I think this kind of brings us full circle back to this idea of values where we begin. Right? What are the values that are driving this, that are driving our work, right? Whether it be in education, whether it be in design, and how are we making space and acknowledging the wealth of experience that individuals bring, right? So one question that and everybody on the panel can speak to this one, as we are here in 2023 moving forward, and as we've been talking about, this conversation has sort of been at this intersection of our subtitle for the conversation today was rhythm, embodiment, and culture, right? Called leveraging culture, rhythm, and embodiment. And in the context of community, university, co-design kind of partnerships, right? In these sorts of situations. So with respect to, to that scope of things, where has it not been yet? Right? What are the possibilities from your point of view in terms of these university community partnerships, in terms of leveraging culture, cultural values, cultural systems, and modalities around rhythm and embodiment and movement, right? Where has this work not gone before that you would like to see, right? That you feel like it's sort of like this elephant in the room, and perhaps we're here again like so it's just a little bit, perhaps a little bit more provocative of a question, but where does it fall short in the academy in terms of possibilities, in terms of what we could envision based on what actually is?
I think Sebastian said it earlier. It's a trust issues. I think it's been blocking a lot of things to happen, because a lot of people who come from sometimes academia come in and feel like, okay, we're just gonna do this and we need this information, we're gonna take it and put it into our books. I've seen it happen even in Haiti with a lot of schools, mostly schools who are very interested into spirituality and culture. And sometimes they come and you see this person, flew for a few years into a country. After that, they wrote a book, totally dismissify the culture of that country or of that region, and it becomes very problematic. So for me, I feel like if there is more conversation and more trust and understanding amongst us when it comes to community and universities, I think there are a lot of things that we can do, because you are sitting down in wealth of resources here also too, as people in the communities have so much information to themselves that we never tap in. Otherwise, we look at them like, oh yeah, they didn't finish, college, so So to me, I think there is, great opportunity for us to continue to elevate each other, because I feel like each of us have so much knowledge. Even I'll take an example to my son. And my mother was very, very, very sick to COVID. And I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose my mom. And I do not wanna go through this by myself. And I think one night they came and pick up my mother from a hospital, like to pick up my mother, to bring my mother to a hospital, where I don't know where she was going, because at that time we didn't have no access to hospitals. And I start to really sobbing, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm done, because my mother's gonna die. And my son said to me, 6 years old, touched me in my arm and said, Dad, you don't have to worry. Mom is gonna be okay. Grandma's gonna be perfectly okay. And suddenly my tension and everything just changed in my body. I became so calm, and I passed out and fall asleep. And the next day the doctor was like, we got her stable, we're gonna send her back to you maybe in 3 days, but let her stay in the hospital for a minute, because with the virus. And my mother came back home, my mother's still alive. And that message I still retain it, because I feel like each of us carries so much information in our bodies, and sometimes if we don't really communicate, sometimes it doesn't happen.
Anyone else?
I'll jump in. So I think that I'll just give my perspective clearly on this. So I think from an institutional standpoint, and I'm not saying Northeastern in this just for clarity, but there's a lot of Native American bodies still being housed at, educational institutions. There's a lot of our objects, our people, our bodies, our history that needs to be returned, repatriated, whatever word you want to use. And I do not speak for all Native or Indigenous people, but we are not the only ones, right? Just down, not that far from us, Harvard has hundreds, and they have chosen not to return them, and they are not the only ones. I flip-flop several times, and I probably will again, on whether or not we can the current institutions that exist from an educational standpoint deserve access, and if they ever will deserve access. And so part of me is like, well, bringing more people into the fold and making people more connected will mean that more people will have access. Sometimes I think that institutions were never built for us, and like therefore can they be used for us? And I don't necessarily have answers for that, but those are certainly questions that I'm constantly asking myself. So all I can say is that I continue to do my work and work with institutions that can support me in being able to do that work. But how much credit versus how much giving over to that institution is a big question that I constantly grapple with. And right now, I think I have a really wonderful relationship with Northeastern, which is why I feel comfortable being able to even say this, because I feel like Northeastern, for the most part, has not been extractive of me in that sense. They want me to do my work and all that sort of stuff, and I appreciate that. So I haven't had those issues as I have in other institutions, and so I'm appreciative of that, and that's why I feel comfortable even coming on and talking about this in this space, if that makes sense. But with that said, I still question every institution as a general principle to say, like, do you even deserve a seat at the table, and should we be sharing this? And then at what point do we say we need to have our own spaces, and how do we build those, either using current technology or our own ancestral wisdom, or a combination of all of these? And yeah, so that's where I'm at, which is a little more flip-floppy, wishy-washy than I think some people would like, but realities is realities.
Can I build on Sebastian? This is why we got along the first time we met. Yeah, I just want to build on that. Like, like Sebastian said, this is a long history that we're in these positions, but it's still going on with these colonial extractive research practices. And for those of us who are really trying to do right, with our communities of doing this work, we're working against that. Despite, our melanated skin, we still represent in some degree of this institution that folks have a lot of distrust, and understandable distrust and fear of what this work is going to turn into. And for me, I really see as my position to do the opposite kind of extract. How can I utilize my positionality as a full tenured professor to extract the resources from the institutions that weren't meant for us? And as my good friend and colleague, Dr. G. Reyes says, like, PhD stands for playa-hated degree. And it honestly, like, there's a lot of hating going on in academia against all kinds of things. And how can we take that perspective and use that to our advantage? Like, okay, let me apply for these like 6-7 figure like family foundation grants, which we know that money is coming from things that are built on the backs of like Black and brown folks of this country, right? And this is their tax loophole. So I'm like, I have no qualms about like taking money. And the other thing is, like, we even see the practices today. Like, what do we give like research participants? Here's a $25 Amazon gift card. Thanks for your help. Really, does that really do, just as a disservice to the wisdom that they're sharing with us? And so one of the things that I know this sounds really minute, but even like changing that paradigm and even facing against these obstacles of structures that are like, oh, you want to give this much money to community advisors? That's beyond like our typical amount. And you have to fight to change these policies and structures and systems to reframe the way that we think about it. It's not like we're giving them a little like, you know, I don't know, gift card or a little thank you card for their help for this short period, but it's actually valuing the wisdom and knowledge that they're sharing with us. And, you know, like a lot of other folks have done in like participatory action research, like, you know, changing them to have them be presenters, co-presenters, co-authors in different pieces and works that we produce. And so some of that work, I think, it's a long road, but I think it's slowly and trying to shift the way that we think about this relationship.
Thank you both for that, for those perspectives from the virtual space. Thank you, Jean. Gonna get it.
That's okay.
Jane, any closing thoughts on this question about?
I think we have questions.
Okay.
No.
Closing thoughts in general, maybe not so much on that question, because I feel like you've definitely.
Yeah, I don't.
Just in terms of
But
possibilities,
just, yeah,
right? Looking towards the future and things to be mindful of or things to look forward to.
I can definitely relate to, you know, when it like the compensatory aspect of, you know, like participatory research. When we embark on like research, like, oh yeah, we need people to, you know, come in and share their knowledge that we're going to use in our design work, and then at the end of the day, we just think of like just slapping, just, you know, the gift card that is supposed to value the time, and that's supposed to be like the incentive. Sometimes like that incentive is really not an incentive for anyone to like want to participate. So that's usually like I do recognize, you know, that challenge, but it's like what do you do when you're just a tiny person within the project who doesn't call for the budget? So you can only do what's within that. So that can also be a challenge for like, you know, researchers who are on a project that there's a certain thing that they cannot go beyond. It's like that just makes your work harder and you have no say in changing it. But I guess perhaps it's beyond just doing just one-off type research thing. It's just is maybe creating like again, I'll go back to community, but like creating like this space where people feel like they are part of the project. They're not just lab rats in the sense like you're just not pulling information, but like they are actually where they feel like whatever they're saying, there's actually effect. So it could be as easy as, you know, maybe you did like your first research and you got some insights from there. And maybe your first iteration of your prototype or something is like then bringing them back on into the process, say, oh, hey, you know, based on what you shared, this is what we've gotten from that, you know, any thoughts. And so just involving our participants more in the design process beyond just user research, right? I think would go a long way in like just building their trust, because it would also, you know, just make them feel like they're part of whatever is being built. And for future references, you can always go back and like, hey, you know, you're doing this thing again. And if you have something, you've built kind of like a foundation of trust that you can do like, okay, yeah, you know, what I did, what I contributed before, this was the outcome. So I feel confident to do that again. So yeah, that's just my understanding.
Okay. Thank you.
To me, I feel like there's so much we can do together. I always invite people to come and dance, because sometimes dance really changes your mind. After you finish moving, you feel like, oh my God, I didn't know I had all this thing in me and I didn't have, you know, now I can see clear. So I always invite people to come to our classes. This Saturday, we're not going to have class because the room was already taken, but our last class for the year is Saturday, December 16th from 1:30 to 3 at the dance complex. But for me, I feel like we are so powerful as a group of people. Black, white, brown, any type of race. I think we have so much knowledge, and I want us to continue to connect with each other, because I feel like with connectivity, there's so much greatness we can do. I'll give you a quick example also too. We always have a fundraiser that we do every year, November, and Jalene was part of it. And we've been growing it by bringing the community to be part of it, because as a dance company, we always want to trade like technicians who knows how to jump, who knows how to do youth split. But to me, I never grew up and believe in only those technical points of dance. I always see the community to be part of it. So we have folks who in their late 80s or early 80s, from people in their 40s and 20s to be mixing together, and they never really went to school, some of them, for dance. And we were able to build a choreography. All of them put their energy and they presented at the end of the fundraiser. And everybody's like, oh my God, are these people been learning dancing with you for a long time? And I'm like, yeah, they come to dance classes, but they're not really in a strong regimen every day that they have to come and learn. How can they dance like this? And I'm like, because they invest their time. So for me, I feel like when you invest with each other, I think there's a lot that can be done. So I just encourage for us to continue to be invested.
Great, great. Well, thank you. I want to thank all our panelists, conversation fellows for joining this today. Laurie, any closing thoughts or remarks? We're almost at the 1:30 mark, so we try to keep this on time. For myself, I guess I will briefly, be beyond thank you immensely for your perspective, your insights. You really opened my mind in different directions. From the painful recognition of what you said, Sebastian, about the reality, right? Speaking about elephant in the room, I think you brought up the elephant in the room, right? In terms of really what has been the complicity of these institutions, right? And do we even, does the conversation even need to go further, right? So I think that's an important piece to recognize and to be mindful of and to acknowledge. And I also think your perspective, Cliff, around the paradigm shift that's required, right, to do this work. And I also really appreciate the view on the trust and the hope that you bring, Jean, in terms of the untapped possibilities and the trust that in the human heart, in the human body, in the human spirit, there's infinite amount of knowledge and connection that we can tap into. And to Jane, really also about this design knowledge and process in terms of really thinking critically about the community aspect, right? And what are the ways through which we can tap into these values that we know and that we carry with ourselves and move those forward? How can those be the things that drive the work, right? It's speaking of paradigm shift. So these are some of the thoughts that I'm taking away with me today. And I want to thank the center again, and Stefania especially, for inviting me to co-moderate this last conversation of the semester. Thank you to all our guests, everybody who also joining us online for this conversation today. Yeah.
And I can't add anything to that. You definitely encapsulated all of my thoughts and my gratitude to everyone who's both participated on the panel and members of the audience, both here and online. This has been a really informative opportunity for me. I think that there is a lot for me to digest and kind of bring back to my work that I'm doing here at Northeastern with community and with courses. And I think that there is a lot that can be generated from this conversation. So I encourage us all to keep the conversations going in our respective spheres.
Well, thank you, Jalene, Cliff, Jane, Sebastian, Jean, and Pierre for hosting the final conversation of our 2023 Conversations series at the Center for Design. We're looking forward to spring, where we'll have some topics looking at design and data, design and disability, design in civic spaces, and one more yet to be scheduled. So as soon as we get that under advisement, we'll be sending you all an email. Thank you for participating and sharing your perspectives, knowledge, and wisdom with our community today. We couldn't appreciate it more. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.